Hey everyone, it's D7 from D13 Airsoft, and today I'm joined with D12.
This is D12 from D13 Airsoft
to do an AAR on OP Thunderdome II, a recent Lion Claws event that happened here in North Carolina, a sequel to the last one that happened back in January. Now, I was an admin for the event, while D12 played as a member of Cartel, so we're going to see two different perspectives throughout this AAR, talking about various perspectives on the event. Now, caveat to give before we get started is that players wanted a much larger Airsoft YouTube channel. Already did a stream where they did an AAR of the event, and a lot of their comments on that video will be integrated into this. Specifically with me being an admin, I have some answers to their questions while also want to double down on what they're saying because a lot of their points were very good. Now, with everything being said, the video is going to be broken down into 5 different categories. The first being personal gear, the second, admin specifically on the prep and planning side before the event occurred, 3, admin during the actual game, 4, the player's perspective of the gameplay, and then 5, conclusions. Starting out with personal gear, I was one of the admins out there, so it doesn't really matter too much what I wore, though the only thing I would note is that I did have a riot shield to protect me when I could from some of the BBs. Now as for D12, he had a loadout similar to what he had for the last Thunderdome, which we did talk about in our AR on this channel. Now a couple of things to note that's different is that he was the one who did most of the footage gameplay you were seeing. For him, a good point he learned, particularly with his head setup or his eye protection, was, hey, helmet's good. Straps need to be much easier to readjust, especially for all the gear he's wearing. Eye pro needs to be readjusted. He has one of the mesh masks on for face protection, and just kind of figuring out how all that works together while still trying not to get your glasses fogged up and being able to see him play. And then you add on a GoPro and a run cam on his helmet and his gun, and it gets pretty frustrating. So, something to always learn. And in regards to tracer unit, D12 has something to say.
Having tracer unit and running with those tracer pellets and regular pellet, and I've fallen in love with the tracer unit. There is no way I can go back without it, as it really helped me to find out, how my weapon system was working. And I actually used that on figuring out how my weapon system would, not how, but when it would come dry or not. And that was the Biofrost tracer unit that I bought from Amazon. Turned out to be a really good brand, very dedicated a piece of equipment, and I was very happy with it.
Now move on to prep and planning for the admins. The first sustain we had was ensuring on the admin side that all non-gameplay elements of the event were taking place outside of the mall. So last time we had registration in the center of the mall near door 4 where players walked in. They then had a vendor set up in there, and then there was chrono further down in the mall in one of the rooms. So what that led to was a lot of players kind of walking around places they weren't supposed to be while we're still prepping and setting up the event, or the admins that last time. And having it all outside the mall this time really helped on the admin side, really corral all the cats, really, and also make sure players aren't poking around where they shouldn't be before the game begins. The next sustain was in regards to the Sears building and then the hallways around the major choke point at Upper Broadway Street, as seen on the map. So, but the things we did very different here in regards to the field was Sears is a 2-story building in one corner of the map that was open to us this time, that was not prior. In addition, for the Upper Broadway Street, we made sure we put tarps over a lot of the glass, which was a big AR comment people had last time, and it really helped out making that a more dynamic environment, making it easier for players to get in and out of those areas, while also adding more of the field to explore, specifically in regards to Sears. We'll get more on that later throughout the video, but this is definitely a big improvement that I think we all recognize in planning. The next sustain we had was with spawns, at least to a certain extent. So what we did last year was there was usually the DEA on the top right and then Cartel in the bottom parts of the field, and then we would swap them about halfway through the event. Now what that led to was some choke points around Upper Broadway intersection. In addition, what we had were certain deployment spots at the beginning of each EVO, very close to each other's spawns, and what this led to was some mild harassment, especially for DEA, but ultimately it really didn't work out too well. So having the spawns swapped this time to where both were very close to the top right, but there was a long series of buildings and hallways that were locked and fake walls set up to ensure players weren't spawn killing each other, really helped out avoid a lot of spawn killing. Now with that said, and we'll get to it and improves throughout the video, but did lead to some new issues, and I will talk about some potential solutions to it. The next sustain we had were players who made their own props. This, as well as the spawn, had a double-edged sword to it, but the good part to it was we had a certain amount of props we used for the event, from bricks painted gold to sugar and flour to pretending to be drugs to old broken airsoft rifles, all meant to have unique props that add a more dynamic and interesting aesthetic to the game that we're trying to portray with DEA versus cartel. So it was really cool. And what you saw with players was they could help by making props as part of their arrival to the event. I'm not sure if it counted anything for their registration price. I'm not sure if that was a thing or not. But a lot of players got creative, helped make some more props, which added on to our numbers. But it did become a double-edged sword, where what you had was a lot of players didn't know what the other props look like. So they would look for the stuff that we posted beforehand, and then they didn't understand what the new props these other players made look like. So they kind of just skimmed them over and didn't pick them up. I think a good solution to that would be, if we're going to do this again with players making their own props, would be to just take some pictures of it as they come in and then post them that night before the Friday game event onto the cartel and DA group chats and say, hey, distribute to you guys. This is what some of the other props are looking like. So now moving on to improves for admins is swapping the main spawns at the halfway point. Unlike last game, we did not swap the spawns. So what was labeled as DEF or DEA and then cartel on the map stayed the same for their main spawns for the whole weekend. I think it would have been good to have some dynamicy to the spawns, just shake it up a little bit about a halfway point, maybe Evo 3 or 4, just to have the other side seeing how it looks from a different perspective. And I think some players would have liked that. Mentioned by Players Wanted in their stream was a simplification of the uniforms. So for the DEF, they largely had multicam uniforms and kit with blue DEA jackets on, though they could have some variation in their camo. Now, as for Cartel, they had green-based camos. Obviously, tactical gear didn't matter. It was mainly uniforms. But in addition, a lot of guys came out and LARPed with some pretty goofy outfits, which was very fun. The problem was a lot of the guys who wore more tactical gear, like black tops or some patches on the shoulders. And it really started to get kind of confusing with whose side was on who. So outside of goofy costumes for each side, a good AAR comment in the future would really simplify the uniforms. So for DEA or DEF, however you want to call them, ensure that they're only wearing multicam or their blue jackets, and then Cartel only wearing, say, not even tactical clothing like jeans and plaids, or just something like that where it's much more of a clear contrast. It was bad enough with friendly fire at this event due to how close quarters everything were and how loud grenades and whatnot are in the back hallways. It's just even more confusing when the uniforms look the same. Now for the admin on the gameplay side, I'm going to start with D12 speaking his opinion on it, on how he as a player saw the admins.
As a positive side for CRISPR and how he ran the game, I noticed that the administration or our admins tightened up the belt and were very much more, active in setting down rules and being, part of the game and make sure that everybody's okay. The administration were very professional, and I'm very happy with that. They took it very seriously, and that made me feel more safe as a player, knowing that there are people that were, very committed to what their job position were. So thank you, CRISPR, for having that team on board. I was very happy with that.
And lastly, for this section, this was something, in addition to D12's comments, I would like to iterate that I think we did a really good job of comms internal to us. Friday was a little rusty. Not all of us had walkies, but by Saturday morning onwards, each Evo, every admin that was on the ground out there pretty much had a walkie-talkie communicating with each other. And it really helped out making sure we're all in the right places at the right time, making sure we're following with the battles going, making sure we see two different perspectives on it. So one side will follow the cartel, one will follow DEA, and just make sure that everyone's playing fair. So good on our part. Now moving to improves, what we should have done is push out the map earlier. We had a basic map of the mall for all players well in advance, as far back as the original. However, we added some updates to it probably a week or so before the actual event, which was a little frustrating for some players, I'm sure, but it's just something to better plan on, and I think we have a good framework for coming up into the third one. Moving on to the player perspective of the gameplay, one sustain I'm going to start out with was a lot of love on what happened for Evo 4, which was the Saturday night game. So how that game worked is both sides started in the second floor of the Sears building in a very open area to fight each other in. And they just went at it for that night game. Really interesting. A lot of players like that. For a lot of players without night vision, it worked pretty well because there's a very well lit floor. And as you fought downstairs into the rest of the mall, the lights slowly started to disappear. So really cool dynamic for guys who do have night vision versus those who don't, versus those with weapon lights and whatnot. So a lot of players really like that. Another element we saw that Saturday night that we first utilized then was a mobile spawn rule. So how this worked is throughout the event you had playing cards that COs for each event could give to their guys to give to other players. If you got all your spawns or respawns with your tourniquets removed, what a player could do is grab you and say, hey, give me your card. They would then rip up the card. You could shove your tourniquets back in your pocket and you're back into the game. That was the normal gameplay mechanic, and that was seen at the last Thunderdome as well. What you saw that Saturday night is if a player was still alive and continued to be alive at a start point or a deployment point, what they could do is have a full stack of cards with them, hiding back there, and anytime a player died, they could run back there, rip their card out, and go back out into the play, essentially serving as a type of mobile spawn. Of course, if that player were to get shot and no one else could take their place, that mobile spawn's out. Likewise, if they run out of cards, that spawn is no longer useful. Really cool idea. It worked pretty well, and I would say a good AR comment would be to integrate that more into the rest of the weekend for Thunderdome 3. The next sustain is the use of airdrops. So how this works is players get in touch with a admin, and the admin say, hey, whether it's a bouncing issue or on the hour, we kind of played it by ear. We would say, hey, give us 10 to 12 players. We will admin kill them and transport them over to a specific location behind enemy lines and drop them, and keep both sides on their toes throughout the event. Now, we did this once or twice last Thunderdome, usually out of balancing issues. Just kind of keep the fighting going in some other part of the mall when everyone's getting held up at an intersection or so. This time we made sure to make it more of a conscious gameplay element and allowed them to be used more and produce better results. I know at one time Cartel was dropped at Sears, but they held them off for the last half hour of the game, and that helped them get a lot of points. Likewise, it helped to get a lot of guys into the basement when they couldn't get to it otherwise, and that really gave the other team a surprise. So really good to see that, and a good AR comment would be to continue to do that for Thunderdome 3.
Also, holding back allowed me to be part of what was really cool, my first ever airdrop. So at a certain point, DEA held all of the entrances for the cartel. There was no way going forward without getting, shot up at any kind of breach points. So the admins were allowed to have a group of 20 of us to be part of an airdrop that would be right behind like two different fronts that the DEA had. And so that was an interesting experience of trying to rush to the save point so that way we can become active and then reconnect with a cut-off cartel squad. Actually, squads, maybe an entire platoon they were cut off. But still, it was very fun and very interesting being able to regroup with everybody and to really take back the entire game. That was a very key moment right there.
The next sustain was the use of a RC car that a player on DEA made. It was a really cool vehicle, and how it worked was a built-up RC car that had DEA written on it. It's supposed to be like a little police drone or whatnot, and it had an airsoft gun and a camera on it. And the idea was there were two touch panels on the front and the back of the rotating turret that if you shot enough times, its green lights would slowly disappear into a life bar, and if you do enough times, the RC car would turn off. Very interesting mechanic, and it was really cool to see. And unfortunately, Cartel didn't really have an equivalent. So a good AR comment is if that guy's going to come back, I say every other Evo, with there being a total of 5 Evos for that event, have him switch sides each side, have it more of a balance, and treat him more as like a type of asset or kill streak for that team. And then lastly, for sustains would be really just stressing of an environment like this, how important it is to work together as a team and to get to know a lot of the players to be more efficient. D12 is going to add more into this.
So what I have learned from this game is that playing this game, doing solo objectives or solo runs proved to be very challenging. Even though I was part of a team, the team kind of split off, doing their own things from their own inner groups. My squad was split between a goon squad and copperheads, and it was very difficult for me to try to catch up with them to figure out what was going on. However, they didn't have a radio system while I did, and that kind of proved its own difficulties trying to catch up with them when it came to being separated from, getting shot and revived or just splitting off in our own little ways. So, the future events, I would definitely be looking forward to having an actual, I won't say dedicated team, but running with other D13 Airsoft players, as that would be a lot more interesting, a lot more fun with, stronger coordinations. As I was able to link up with other stragglers from other groups and, either lead or follow and, complete objectives when I needed to, or was definitely the winning base.
Now moving on to improves. So this first one was also mentioned by Players Wanted, which was how we handled spawns. So again, I already mentioned how we did that, and the biggest issue was in doing so we locked a lot of doors on the top right of the map to really funnel everyone away from each other's spawns and more toward the intersection that you get near door 4. Now it did fix the spawn killing issue, but it led to two different new problems. One, because those doors were often locked on the south part of the top right of the map, that was largely not utilized by either side. We oftentimes try to avoid putting a lot of props down there because we knew DEA would have a big advantage getting to them. So it kind of led to a large part of the map not being utilized. So perhaps fixing that to ensure that we could utilize it more in Thunderdome 3 would be great for players. I will say though, what we didn't find out till we got there was about 3 or 4 of the rooms on the top right up there are no longer safe to be used. It's part of the con as this mall continues to get older that we can't use a lot of those rooms, so it is what it is. The second issue that came from it was that though spawn killing was no longer an issue, you still got people jammed up at the intersection between Wright Street and East Main Avenue just in front of the courthouse. So is what it is. I'm sure there's some ways we could get around it, but it was definitely something noticeable. I think one solution could be, hey, switch spawns halfway in the event, so if one side's suffering from it, they could at least get a different perspective on it, helps with balancing. But I think also there should be a better solution on maybe unlocking some of those doors, maybe having more side quests back there to encourage people to further utilize that part of the map. Another improve for gameplay would be ensuring that more of the lights were taken out for the night game. So what we would do throughout the event is gradually turn off the lights throughout the event, specifically in the basement, to ensure that those who had night vision and those who didn't had a new gameplay mechanic to deal with. Especially in the basement, it was quite good, though I will say there's several lights that we couldn't really turn off. In addition, the Sears building, it was nice to have for that night game on the second floor, but it would be a very interesting mechanic if we completely remove the lights on the first floor or whatnot. So that's an idea I'm tossing out there. I know a lot of guys with night vision would be very happy to hear that. Another thing would be the lack of use of the port in the first floor of Sears. I think we had the port as a magnet point, and then of course the first floor of Sears was really a junction point to get up to the second floor. But there was a whole second half of that ginormous store that wasn't really utilized. And again, I think these would be great places for, say, future side missions. Now, next improved is something that Players Wanted mentioned again, and so did D12. So I'm going to have him kind of explain his perspective on it.
And what was surprising that really wasn't a key moment was the fact of the basement again. Actually, not again. Last time around, the basement was not so much a key point, but it was a very active location. Again, the gunfights, and that was a strong stalemate for the last Thunderdome experience. This time around, it wasn't a whole lot. There was only real contestment when it was the Saturday night game.
So yeah, as you can see, a lot of people definitely realize that the basement is a huge part of the map. It's a really cool place, and it's something that DEA really didn't have a lot of access to throughout the event. Again, swapping the main spawns halfway could help with that. Another compromise I would propose is having door 7 in the basement, which is a dead end, become a permanent spawn for one side or the other. How this would work is per Evo or per phase of the game, that would be a dedicated spawn for either side. So say Evo 2, it would be DEA, then Evo 3 would be Cartel, and then they would switch it again. So that might be a good way to balance it, and that would ensure that each side always has someone threatening them in the basement, an incentive to go down there and fight. Another improve would be the use of riot shields. This was something that seemed like it was going to be a go in the beginning. This was a big AR comment for the first one. It seemed like it was going to happen, and then in the end it got dropped. So kind of a shame, though I would still like to push for it for Thunderdome 3. How I think it would work would be each side gets a maximum of 3 riot shields, so not a lot. The shields have to be, a certain measurement, certain weight maybe, and then have to be completely blacked out so that you can't see through it. So players can still, who use it, have to look around it and become, exposed. Likewise, they would have to use a sidearm only. Gun hits would count for them, and then grenades could still take them out. And despite all those rules, what would hopefully happen with these riot shields is each side's CO would have a new asset to help with a lot of funnel points, a lot of choke points that their team are having issues with. The next improve is something players wanted mentioned again, which is the issue with grenades. The rules for Lion's Claws events say that grenades have a 15-foot kill radius, and if you're in the room with no hard cover, generally speaking, give or take, you're going to be dead. With that said, a lot of the rooms here vary in size, and what counted as hard cover to survive one was oftentimes a case-by-case basis, depending on where that grenade landed. This is one of the biggest things us as admins had to go in and make sure that was actually being conducted properly, because a player on different teams is not going to trust another player on another team, is what it is. But a way to smooth this out, and a proposal that was made by Players Wanted, was to make grenades kill pretty much everyone in a room. Now, due to the size of a lot of these rooms, that could be a bit frustrating. So I would have a compromise, which is if players are in a hardened wall, and we would have to very clearly define a wall, or perhaps a pillar like you see in the Sears building, which there's not a lot of cover there, maybe that could save you. But just about everything else, from a desk to some plywood light against something, would kill you. Something that needs to be refined, but I know there is a lot of frustration there, especially when you're paying 10 to 20 bucks per grenade. You guys want to make sure they kill people. Another complaint on Players Wanted was that they didn't like how players can hide from grenades and BBs behind glass panels. We heavily mitigated it by putting a bunch of tarps around those windows so that players are actually blind for the most part. They did sometimes get creative. I know one guy jumped on another guy's back to look over. Another guy took video on a phone and then looked at his phone. That's fine. They're getting creative with it. But generally speaking, players had to physically expose themselves to see what's going on. And that really helped out a lot with it. But a lot of the malls still didn't have that. So instead of what Players Wanted proposed, I would say a different compromise, which would be just adding more tarps on the windows, which we already have the tarps there now. By the time the third event rolls around, we could probably do it for the majority of the rest of the main hallways at the mall. I think that'd be a good compromise. Another improve would be the use of the RFID card reader. So this is the only real side quest we had throughout the event. And it was really unique. A admin/player came out with this really unique scan card reader where you had 2 different RFID cards, one labeled Cartel, one labeled DEA. You swipe the card and you then put it in a bucket right next to it, and it gives you an X amount of points for that phase, and also detects if cards have already been scanned, so you can't just keep doubling up on it and cheating or anything. Really cool idea. The cards were hidden throughout the field, and what you were supposed to do was not mess with the other team's cards, unlike every other prop there, which confused a lot of players. They end up stealing the other team's cards anyway and preventing them from being able to scan it. In addition, the card reader was only there for majority Saturday. They were not there Friday or Sunday, and it was only in one location on the second floor of Sears. So the premise was definitely really good, And I would say a good compromise or a good improvement for it, looking into Thunderdome 3, would be one, to ensure the RFID cards cannot be stolen by the team. I think a good way to handle that would be, instead of hiding them around the field, you issue them per hour to the team COs, and then they have to distribute it to their guys as a mission to get it to the card reader location to scan them for extra points. In addition, what they could do, or what we could do as admins, is each Evo, or each phase of the game, move the card reader location throughout the field. Maybe have it in the basement one day, another time have it in one of the floors of Sears, another perhaps in the dead center of a junction point where we know there's going to be a lot of contact, and further add a lot of dynamicy to that mission. But the premise is really cool, and I'd like to see more of it. Now, moving on to conclusions, D12 has some final thoughts.
So in my closing remarks, I give an approval to Operation Thunderdome market expansion, as it was very fun, very entertaining, and I still learned a lot on mainly my own equipment basis, and learning I still have some leadership potential that I just need to scratch it. And I very much look forward to my next Airsoft game with the company Operation Line Claw. So thank you to CRISPR and team for allowing me to play again. So my last little bit is just like last time: if you ain't dripping, you're drowning.
As for my conclusions, overall, it looked like a really good event. Looked like a general improvement from the last one. Players really liked it. I was pretty proud of being able to be an admin there for that event. Took a lot of good lessons from it and learning about being admin for an event that large. I look forward to seeing Thunderdome 3, which tentatively right now looks like it's going to be in October of 2023, though the exact date is unknown for now. And after that, there's a good chance the mall is going to be taken down, so this is really your last chance to get in on the action at this really unique location that I would highly recommend. Tell me if you guys agree or disagree. You want to add some more comments about this AR in the comment section, and I'll see you guys around.